And welcome everyone to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan. On today's episode, Pongo and I are joined by returning guest Ryan from Playing with Power to give you the definitive cEDH tier list of 2022. Yes, that's right. It's that time of year again. But before we get into all of that, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Into the AM. Into the AM is a clothing company that creates premium, high-quality apparel. They prioritize self-expression with their vibrant designs, and they prioritize unparalleled comfort with their high-quality fabrics and eco-friendly inks. I've tried these shirts myself. I'm wearing one right now, and I honestly love the look and feel of these shirts. I got a few of these. I really, honestly, because I've gotten to wash this shirt once, is it didn't shrink as much as I thought it might, because a lot of times with extra, like double XL shirts, I have this issue where they shrink a little bit. I have a pretty long torso. I have broad shoulders, so I have that hard issue of trying to find a shirt that like fits my body well. And these honestly fit my body really well, and they have really cool design. Honestly, I love this. It reminded me of stuff from like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, which is part of why I really liked it. This is actually one of their newer designs that is part of their graphic tee section, so you can go check out some of their latest designs. The other thing that I really like about this company is that they really stand by their products with a 30-day money-back guarantee. They have hassle-free returns, and their shipping was pretty fast. It got to me really quickly. Right now, they are running a bundle deal for their graphic tees where you can get 3 tees for $60. So go use my link down in the description below and get 10% off your purchase today. Thanks so much for Into the AM for sponsoring today's episode. With that said, let's get into this tier list, guys. So we're here to update the definitive cEDH tier list. And we changed it up a little bit this year. So last year, the last 2 years we did, what was it, S through F tiers, something like that, like the traditional thing. We simplified it a little bit this year. So instead, we have 4 tiers. There is the S tier, which is for what we consider to be optimal commanders. There is the A tier, which is for what we consider to be great commanders. Not quite optimal, but they're really great. And then there's the B tier for commanders that we think are good. They're not great, but they're good. You'll see them and they'll play well and they'll do well. And then there is the C tier, which are fringe decks that you might see pop up, will do well in the right hands, but you know, it doesn't mean your mileage may vary. Is kind of the idea behind that tier.
I really like the idea that we didn't do this commander is bad rankings anymore, because I think that there's just so much weight to that kind of thing. Hey, you're playing an F tier commander. This is a horrible commander. Or we have exceptions 1, 2, and 3 because maybe it's a mono white commander, and if you're a really good pilot, it's great. But if you're not a great pilot, it's bad. All of those things just gave so many negative connotations to them. It either said this is a bad commander and you're a bad person for selecting it, or you're a bad pilot. Essentially, that's what we were kind of in not intentionally saying, but almost kind of unintentionally coming across as saying this stuff is bad. And I really like that we just went as low as fringe, because fringe is not bad. That's not a bad connotation. That's not a bad saying. And I like that that's what we are using now for our tiers. And that way people, they understand that, well, they said that so-and-so was a D or an F tier. I might not give it a shot. No, it's fine. If it's fringe tier, it's okay to be fringe tier. That's perfectly fine. And I really like that.
And for context, for some of you out there, I am a big proprietor of like Arden Kraum, of Lavinia, of I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I play, right? That's kind of blue, white, X that even I ranked in the C tier because I was just like looking at it and I'm like, listen, either it doesn't see wide enough play or B, it's harder for most people to play. Like those are some things that I think weigh into it. But with all that being said, none of this is an indictment on your favorite commander. None of this is this is all in good fun. We're giving our opinions on these, and we're going to kind of give you an idea of what we think are the best options, but that doesn't mean those are the only options. There's tons of stuff out there. So we went through every commander that was on the database, that was on the Budget Brews database, and all three of us individually gave our ranking to all of these commanders. We went through them all. And so the ones that we were all in agreement on, we're just kind of gonna breeze by here. So first, let's look at our B tier commanders that we all agreed on were B tier. First off, we've got Bjorna and Warnog. And if you're not familiar with that, those are the Stranger Things commanders, otherwise known as Tiny Blue Farm, those types of things. We all agreed that was a good commander pairing. Also, Brea Ethereum Sculptor is here in this category. Holden and Paco, we all agreed on. Ishai Jeska, Kess Dissident Mage, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, Malcolm and Tymna, Minsk Beloved Ranger, the Naya one, Prosper Tomebound, Selvala Heart of the Wilds, which is the mono green Selvala. Yes, there are two Selvalas. We all agreed that Shorakai was here in this B territory. Timnatana we ranked as B tier, and Tassiger the Golden Fang as B tier, and finally the Gitrog monster we put here in the B tier category. And
a lot of good commanders. It's almost like this is the good tier.
Oh, this is a good tier.
It is a good tier. And there's a lot of good stuff here. I know, like for me, when we simplified the categories, there were some commanders that I had higher up in previous years, like Kess, like Tassiger, that when we look at it through this lens, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm evaluating them a little bit differently than, the way we did it before. So for you guys, and I'll start with Brian on this one. With these, was there anything in particular that stood out in the B tier that was like a big shift for you from the previous years to this year?
Yeah, I would say, without actually going into saying, well, this commander was this last year and this commander's this year, was from a shift perspective, now that I could look at it through the lens that of, hey, we have only optimal through fringe, this allowed me to not constantly play a comparison against each other. Well, Joyra's this, so, well, is this better than Joyra? Therefore, it has to be higher. And having that kind of ranking system, that really helped me in determining some of these rankings because of that. But actually going through and looking through some of them and rating them, yes, there were some where I was starting to get like, this one did used to be higher, but so many other decks were starting to get more tools that we saw it just kind of falling out of favor, and or we had situations where people were, what's the best way to put it? People were just playing with new toys and they're just getting forgotten about almost. Things like Brea, Ethereum Shaper, for example. Brea is Blue Farm's colors, so you could literally put Blue Farm, the 99, 98 into Brea, and it will operate very similarly with the exception of the two advantage engines in the command zone. You have a combo outlet in the command zone, which is nice. But the idea that, Brea is not there and instead the two advantage engines are kind of bring things a little bit more forward. And that's the stuff that kind of happens over time. And so, like, no, there's not like a specific, like, oh, this one is strictly worse this year than it was last year. Not so much as I see meta shifts And sometimes these
Mhm.
meta shifts can cause these things to get bumped up and down. Like, for example, the one I would probably say was probably the biggest shift for me was Kess, Dissident Mage.
Yep.
So much Grixis good stuff has come out. We've come out with so many different combos for it. It just feels, which I know is so strange, that Kess just isn't doing enough for us anymore. If I had to really just pick one, it would probably be Kess Dissident Mage. But
Yeah.
the second one for me would probably be Tymna. Um, Tymna has always kind of had a home, if you will, in so many different metas because it was the meta buster, and there's always people who love to play the meta buster type decks. And I'm seeing a lot of people straying away from that in favor of the fringe. They're like, well, I'm going to play this Tymna because I like to play this or that or the other. But now we've come out with so many different commanders that just pack it right into itself that you don't even have to have that anymore. Like, for
Right.
example, Tymna with the blood pod and stuff like that. Now you can get away with just running straight, stacks commanders that are a little bit more just oriented towards stacks. Things like Shorkai Genesis Engine and things along those lines allow you to really lean harder into what you're trying to play. And you see the 4-color Tymna kind of falling out of favor in favor of that kind of stuff. And I know that's not
We
the
even
only thing,
see
but
you even see stuff like Ardentana starting to be a lot more played than Tymna, and I think part of that is just like I feel like Arden complements Tana in just such a good way because it allows you to get like maximum value out of Tana. I feel like
I agree.
because it's like the only deck I've ever seen Colossal Hammer actually be worth playing in.
Yeah.
Pongo, for you, were there in this B tier here, were there any that you felt like you either softened up on or you got more like higher on from last year?
Well, I mean, I have to echo what Ryan was saying, where I think last year, if you go and check out that video, and I highly recommend you do, I was applying a
Videos.
sort of yeah, I was applying a more well, not that I didn't this year, but I was applying sort of an objective set of criteria to each commander. Um, and so, if a commander like Kess, for instance, fit into a particular color combination, I would rate it very, very highly, kind of just sort of off the bat. Whereas this year, I've sort of softened up a little bit on that, where, obviously, as Ryan was saying, Kess is still in very, very good colors, but I'm sort of extending my criteria to say, kind of again, like what Ryan was talking about. Um, yes, Kess is in these great colors, but there's like so many other commanders in those colors that I would prefer to play.
Right.
That it's less to do with Kess's power level, just purely to do with Kess's power level, and also to do with kind of like my excitement toward that particular commander.
Yeah.
So this is, a tier list, ratings that have to do as much with power level as they do with my own kind of personal feelings about playing that commander, and how excited I am to play with that commander. So Kess certainly is one that I think has lowered. Kinnan, obviously, I think in the past I put higher as well, and it's a bit lower this year. And that's, I think, primarily to do with the fact that people have started to wake up a little bit more to Kinnan.
You realize they need to
Since some of
remove the fucking Kinnan.
Yeah.
since some of the big
Can't get away with
innovations
Kinnan anymore. Yeah.
yeah, since some of the big innovations have occurred with the deck. And then so I guess for one that perhaps is a little bit higher than it was, or that I might have put it based on my previous criteria. It's a good question. Maybe something like, I don't know, Shorikai, just because I feel like
Blue White has the worst win cons.
well, that's it.
What win cons?
Yeah. It kind of feels like that's it. As a blue-white deck, perhaps I would have put it lower in the past. Maybe less last year than maybe even the year previous. Just based on the fact that Shorikai itself brings so much to the table.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's say maybe blue-white as a whole.
I will say a commander that I definitely got a lot more that I would have ranked lower in the past and am a lot high, like much lower in the past, and am a lot higher on now in this B section right here is Nimrus. I am continually impressed by that deck. Like I am continually, every time I see it get played, whether it's Cicada in the MLC or somebody like a Sinestra plays it every now and again. Every time I see it get played, it is so good. It is what Rashmi wishes it was.
Yep.
And it's just it's also my type of bullshit because it's just control, and I love good control. So Nimrus is one of those decks that I'm like I think is a lot people sleep on that deck a lot more than they should, and I think it's a very good strategy. Moving up now to the A tier, the commanders we all agreed were great. First tier, we have Bruce Thrasios. Then we have Jessica Tymna, Krark Sakashima here as the third one, Malcolm Tymna in Thrasios Vial Smasher. And really, I don't see any surprises here other than Krark Sakashima and Malcolm Tana have really jumped up, I feel like, not only for us, but in the cEDH community as a whole, as becoming legitimate like contenders on big stages.
Yeah. I think if you look at the beginning of the year, Malcolm got away with a lot more than it does now.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'll say about Malcolm. But it put in a little bit. It had a few successful tournament runs where pilots did quite well with the deck, and people are kind of waking up to how much of a threat Malcolm poses. So, yeah, I mean, certainly it deserves its tier, its A tier rating, but it's one of those situations where maybe it's like a little bit like Kinnan, where maybe give it another year time. And perhaps we will be saying, okay, well, you can't quite get away with it as easily with Malcolm Tana.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much of it is a result of the interaction that people are packing because of the so many people have been going to this Grixis base Turbo Nas very instance and sorcery heavy strategy, that the interaction that people are packing because of that is not able to deal with what Malcolm Tana is doing. And I think that may be a piece of that. And I'm curious if there is a meta shift in between now and next year that may push Malcolm Tana a bit out of this higher class of commanders.
You have a lot of really big talking heads in the community that play a lot of Turbo Nas, and they start to talk people out of playing certain interaction pieces that are in a Turbo Nas frame of mind or a Turbo Nas strategy. Makes perfect sense. You're playing proactively. You want to stop what they're trying to stop you from doing not necessarily stop what they're doing. And it gets more and more greedy, and it gets to the point where you're saying things like mana drain and counterspell aren't good enough anymore. Whereas mana drain and counterspell, the 2 blue pips, is a little bit tough to ask in a 4 and 5 color pile, but it also counters the Glinthorn Buccaneer that they're casting from their hand. Whereas all you're sitting on is the Dispel, and you're like, I guess I just lose. And that's because a lot of people that are not playing Turbo Nas are taking those same strategies that are for Turbo Nas and applying them to non-Turbo Nas based decks. They don't know. They're not. It's. I understand why they're doing it, but it's just a matter of context that you have to understand that where that is coming from. Don't let that sway your opinion or change your deck based upon maybe what you're still trying to accomplish. If you're more mid-rangey, don't remove Counterspell and mana drain from your deck. Like, you need to be able to stop these people with these creature-based combos. And Malcolm Tana capitalized on that when we went so heavy into the Nas and Grixis territories. And Malcolm Tana was just pulling out wins. You could maybe get their Neo form. Like that was if you were lucky,
darn.
that's. But like beyond that, it was like, oh, I really have nothing for this because it's all activated abilities after that. And you're just done.
Yep. Next tier we only this is the optimal, the best tier. One of them has been a mainstay of the top for the entirety of the tier list video series, and the other has not. It has certainly worked its way up here, but the first is Najeela. Obviously, we all agreed on Najeela. And the second one, these were the only two that we were unanimously S tier on, was Najeela and Winota. And I tell you what, I have been consistently blown away by just how consistently good Winota has been. It is shocking to me how, like, even a year ago, we looked at Winota and we're like, oh, it's still in white red. Like, it's still in Boros. It's not that good. And now we look at it, we're like, no, it's like one of the best decks in the format. Like,
I think Winota's the poster child of what we've been talking about for a bit now, though. Where, yes, again, at this point in history, I feel comfortable giving it the S tier, but people are again waking up to Winota. And I think that we will start to see a meta shift where people decide to stop losing to Winota. And I think part of that is, for example, not just playing more like extra turn effects that kill you, and instead respecting, the fact that like you have to interact with people, things like that. So, will Winota still be the boogeyman that she is next year? Hard to say. It really kind of depends on sort of how people's deck building or how the meta forces shake out, as it were.
It's just wild. I just feel like the deck just keeps getting better and better every year. Like every year I see it like the first year it came out, it was like, oh, this is pretty good. This is all right. And then last year I saw it and I was like, okay, this is really good, but it's still Boros. And then this year it's just topped so many events at this point that now I'm just like, I mean, it's gonna win something. It won Hunt City. It's top 4 to other events. Like, it's just so consistently good that I can't look at this card now and be like, it's not top tier. But I don't know. It's
as long as they keep printing humans and non-humans, it's always going to get better. So that's kind of the folly of it.
Yeah.
Oh man. So now with that,
expensive humans and cheap non-humans.
That's
right?
exactly right.
Yeah.
So let's get into the meat of the episode here. And these are the 17 commanders that we're going to be talking about in detail here today. The first one here on our list, we're going to start with blue, is Urza Lord High Artificer. And we're about to get a bunch of new Urzas. So this is going to, we're going to have to start being very specific with our Urza terminology. But Urza Lord High Artificer, so Ryan ranked it at an A, Pongo ranked it at a B, and I also ranked it at a B. So Ryan, really, when you look at this, you gave it the highest rating of all of us. What are your thoughts on Urza and why you rank it a little like as the great, not good?
So I think a large part of that will come with the context of whenever you're talking about commanders in competitive EDH, a lot of times you're not always talking about one individual deck because cEDH is EDH. It's commander. You can build things a lot of different ways. Urza Lord High Artificer can be built as a Polytyrant version or a just regular mono blue control version. And depending on which one you're talking about can depend greatly on how good the deck is. If everyone's always saying, oh, well, everyone's using the Polytyrant version, the Polytyrant version is the best version, this is the one that everyone should be playing, the other one is garbage, then I would be more inclined to give it a B as well, and we would have all been unanimous. However, Urza Lord High Artificer can be built two different ways: Poly Tyrant and Control. The Control version of Urza is better than Poly Tyrant. You can @ me on Twitter, and I'll block you. I'm just kidding. But I'm
Get
sorry.
in the comments.
Yeah, in the comments. but like for real, it's better. It's a better version. You have so many great blue creatures that you are intentionally foregoing just so you can flip into your Hullbreaker Horror or your Tight Spout Tyrant. And you're just losing the game in the meantime because someone's just smacking you with their 4/4 Winota or their 4/4 Kraum, and you can't block it or you can't do anything about it. And maybe I could cast a bounce spell or whatever, but get out of my face with that. Of course, there's always that argument. But there's so many great creatures that you can't have, like, I don't know, Gilded Drake. What an amazing card that you can't run just so you
Ledger
can
Shredder.
flip into, Ledger Shredder, that you can flip into a Hullbreaker Horror. It is not the best version. And people are afraid to say that for some reason, and I don't know why. I have consistently seen the Polytyrant version of Urza flounder at tables, not go anywhere, not make an impact on the game, and just straight lose. And I've seen the other version be a force to reckon with every time and always constantly be the threat at the table. It top forward Hunt City.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The Control version is what top forward Punt City, wasn't it?
Not the Polytyrant version, the regular Control with just really good blue spells, best color in the entire game. You play the best cards of those colors, and you have a really formidable deck. And that's when I put that ranking in, it was based primarily on the fact that I wanted to let people know that this isn't just these commanders don't just pilot one deck. They can pilot completely different strategies, and they could go do completely different things. And based upon the fact that Urza can also technically be just this good control deck, it really does put in good numbers. It does a really good job, and I do think it is deserving of an A tier based upon that.
So Pongo, you and I gave it a B here. What are your thoughts on it? Because I know that from speaking to you previously, I know that you don't necessarily agree with Ryan's opinion on that, because I think you have been more of a proprietor of the Poly Tyrant version. So give me some of your takes on this and why you think it's not quite great, but it's good.
Well, I think this speaks to why I have Urza just in the B tier in general. So I used to play quite a bit of Urza, being sort of part of a group of people who worked really hard early on trying to solve the deck. And so while playing that deck, and this was back when I wasn't playing the Polytyrant version of the deck, I always struggled with how difficult it is to actually close out the game with that deck. And I think that this still holds true to this day. And I mean, it is something that the Polytyrant version of the deck does do better, in my opinion. Being able to convert into an actual win when the opportunity presents itself. That being said, I can get where Ryan's coming from, where the sort of, let's say, UPS version of the deck, if you want to go for the deep cut there, does have substantially higher card quality, just in terms of the actual creature package it can play and support, because it doesn't have to omit all of that just to try to enable the polymorph type combos. And so on the one hand, I am a strong proponent of card quality as well, as anybody who knows me well will no doubt be aware of. So to me, that just speaks to kind of a tension in Urza that goes sort of in both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it with Urza. And for me, that's why it feels like I have to put it in the B tier. And that speaks perhaps less to, the absolute power level of the deck. And it also speaks to just kind of my own personal feelings playing the deck, which is, for me, somewhat of a frustrating experience.
I'm kind of in this position where I agree with both of you. I think that it is a frustrating deck to pilot, regardless of which one that you play. And I think part of that is that I think that, and this is something we touched on earlier, is that blue-white has like pretty bad win cons. I think mono blue has even worse win cons. Because it's just like it's half the card pool that you had previously. And I think blue is a color, and this is probably a really hot take, so strap in. I think blue as a color is, in Commander, not a good focal point color as far as being the driving thing that like your whole deck, like if your whole deck is based around blue, you need something to supplement that to get you to victory. I feel like I think a lot of blue, and I think that's what the Polytyrant list is trying to do, right? It's trying to pull this big thing out that lets you bounce all these things and is trying to convert your card advantage and the cards that you get and your card quality that you can have in mono blue into a win, but you're doing that at the expense of other good cards, the downside of the version with the good cards. So you don't really have a good payoff to win the game. And so one of the things for me is I look at this and I go, I could play Thoracle in it, but that feels like a terrible card to play in mono blue. Like my win cons in mono blue aren't great. So if I'm going to play it as control, I'm going to want to add a color, and that's typically going to be black because then I can play Thoracle. And so I think it's one of those things where it is one of like what it's, I think it's the only color that isn't black. Like I think blue and black are the two colors that when you try to play them on their own, they are fine. They do okay, but they aren't as good as they are as they can be when they're in combination with other colors, is kind of how I feel about blue as a color strategy in Commander overall.
You would say that like the synergy of blue with another color is kind of stronger than the sum of its individual components.
That's exactly what I kind of feel like is I mean, I played Urza in the 99 of a lot of decks, and I'll tell you what, it's a fantastic card even in the 99.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think blue is particularly good at closing out games. It's really good at making the game go long. But
yeah, I mean, that's the problem with lacking tutors, right?
Yeah,
it's very difficult to kind of just have the card that you need when you need it and win the game when you want to win.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Looking over to our next card here, it's a mono red card, and this is a card that we're going to talk about here for a moment, but it is Godo Bandit Warlord. If you don't know what the card does, look at the screen. I'm going to put the card up. It is everybody's favorite card that you have to deal with at a tournament, because every tournament has at least 3 Godo players there. And
mm-hmm. Yep.
Pongo and I have it ranked as a B tier. Ryan, you put it up there in S tier. And obviously it's because it's the best deck.
I mean,
there's no bias here. Right?
There's absolutely zero bias. So we revamped our tiers. S was optimal. There is no more of an optimal card than you just cast one card and win the game, and it's in the command zone. That's the definition of optimal to me. I don't know about you guys, but like that is all you have.
Combos with mana,
combos with mana. I think that's one of the most abundant resources in this game. I don't see how that doesn't fit the definition of optimal to a T, quite frankly. Yeah. But in all seriousness, so what happened is last year I ranked this a B as well with all of you guys, and then the Red Love Discord caught wind of it, and they gave me the traitor role because I betrayed my brethren. And I still to this day have a black role in that Discord. I'm like one person who has the role still. And so I'm needlessly shilling to get rid of that traitor role.
You were trying to regain your
I
former
was
glory.
trying to regain my honor. So it is S tier until the traitor role is gone.
Okay.
They're just gonna
Okay.
rename it Reformed Traitor.
That's right.
It'll
Former
stay the
traitor.
same.
It'll
Former
stay
traitor.
black.
Oh my goodness. Well,
But,
moving over to
anyway, the long short is just that, Godo's really good. I've had Godo for years, and depending on which version of Godo you're playing, it's, it could be a very, very fast deck. And what did you just say? You just said, you've always got to deal with this commander. Once you deal with it, a lot of times it's good. Just about any removal hurts Godo really bad, but it's always the first threat at the table.
I think that this actually it's a really great example of how powerful the so-called B tier decks can be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because I think Godo, it's a deck that I would play 100%.
Yeah.
Like it's 100% my kind of deck. I love the consistency aspect of it, where you kind of just have to mulligan for mana in many situations, and then you pretty much have your whole combo assembled out of the command zone. And it is capable, as Ryan was saying, of going very, very fast, and it actually has pretty good card quality. Just because Wizards keeps printing really stupid red cards.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, why do I ultimately put it in the B tier if I have such good things to say about it? Well, I mean, it's kind of more to do with the fact that people understand the deck very well at this point. It can be interacted with kind of by pretty much every type of interaction, whether that's artifact removal or creature removal. It does kind of suffer to two very, very commonly played hate pieces, the Opposition Agent, which even sees play in a lot of the turbo decks, and Draneth Magistrate, right? And so you don't have necessarily great like backup lines for that. And I think I almost put Winota in the A tier kind of for similar reasons, where it is disruptible if you know what it's doing, and it falls pretty hard if people like just mulligan to a Draneth Magistrate, something like that. But I put it in the S tier to make a statement, which was that like people are not respecting this deck enough. They're not mulliganing appropriately for the deck. And so if I don't put it in the S tier, if I don't do, this is a public service announcement, which is you will continue losing to Winota if you keep thinking of it as like that Boros deck that like, maybe on turn 4 I need to be concerned about, right? Like,
you got to be worried about it immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing the Lord's work, Pongo. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
On to the next red deck. It is a red deck that, speaking of Monarch events, actually won what was the card Marchesa way back in, believe it or not, March. And it is Magda Brazen Outlaw. And this is a commander that did really well in the tournament scene there for a little bit. Did really bad in the MLC, as I predicted, because everybody in the MLC knew exactly what it was doing. Ryan, you have it at an A, and Pongo and I, again, have it at a B. So I think, again, what makes you kind of, you know what, actually, let's do it this way. We'll do it a different way. Pongo, with Magda, what in your mind puts it at a B tier instead of an
A? So I think for me, a big part of the reason why I wouldn't put it in the A tier is if you kind of look at a lot of the commanders that I put in the A tier, the majority of them have one thing in common, and it's that they contain blue and black in their color identity.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. So
reasonable.
Yeah. As I was saying, sort of at the beginning of this recording, I did still apply some of the same heuristics, some of the same criteria as I applied last year, which is for me, color combination still very, very important. And I think blue and black plus, by my estimation, is a requirement to get into those higher tiers. Just blue black on its own in the past would have been enough for me to say that this is like a good deck, possibly like like B plus, A sort of, or A minus sort of tier, and then you start adding colors and you start to push above that. I think Magda's sort of biggest issue is, again, just the color identity, the sort of the card quality. And also, once people kind of get what the deck is doing, it loses a little bit of it loses some strength just because people now know that it has like instant speed win conditions. People are starting to understand the requirements for those win conditions, the points of interaction.
Just kill the Magda. It's that easy. Just kill the Magda.
Just kill the commander is the kind of the catchphrase for most decks.
For a lot of the commander focused strategies.
Winota, Godo, Magda, just kill the commander and usually a good spot.
Right. And I mean, so that's a problem that a lot of these commanders share, which is that they don't necessarily have great backups outside of their commander reliant strategies. Until you start looking at blue and black, and at which point you kind of, you can be reliant on more or less your entire 99 or 98 without necessarily caring about your commander. So yeah, I would say that for me, Magda's a very, very good deck. Very, very strong. And again, I love red. Don't get me wrong. Like you know this because I've played against you with my Ragavan deck on stream. Mono red is my jam, and I would play the hell out of Magda. I think it's a very, very good deck. It's just that I think that it lacks some of the necessary tools to be consistently great against players, who are going to have your number and kind of know what you're up to.
Ryan, so you think it's an A, so you obviously have a better opinion. What is kind of your rebuttal to that?
So one of the things I think that is really good about Magda is that it's in mono red, and I have to double down against that traitor roll that I talked about earlier. So I was just hedging my bets. It's actually like a French commander. No, I'm just kidding. But in all honesty, what I really love about Magda is that it offers the unique opportunity to allow you to tutor in a color that notoriously does not let you do that. It also allows you to tutor not for just nonsense that you normally don't need, but like any artifact or dragon, right?
So the dragon part is so good.
So random, but it's so good.
It's so good.
Yeah. And so a lot of times when you look at things like Grixis lists and stuff like that, a lot of times those 99, 98 cards are pretty locked in. Your idea of shifting to the meta is usually like 1 or 2 cards. But with Magda, you have so many more available slots to be able to really cater to your meta. It's a type of deck that allows you to build to your meta, and it scales so well when you do that. You run in a lot of Underworld Breach decks and Turbo decks, that's fine. You get more artifact hate out of it. And a lot of people see Magda as, well, he just wins really quickly. She wins fast, and that's what you got to do. It's like Godo. It's actually not like that per se. A lot of times, if you're piloting it properly, you'll see Magda sit on 10 treasures and just sit there with nothing, and not crack them. Everyone's wondering why it's not being cracked, because what's going to happen is they're going to try and win over top Oracle, and they're going to be able to do it with backup and things like that. And if you're piloting that deck that way, you really find yourself in a very advantageous position. It also allows it. One of the biggest proponents I also have when it comes to heuristics and philosophies, when it comes to Commander and Magic in general, is that if you can't break parity on stacks, you probably shouldn't be running that stacks piece. And I know that there's somewhat of a hot take in there and all that, and I understand. Yeah, it's a shocker. I'm absolutely shocked. But so many people do. And they're like, here's a 3-ball in my whatever deck, and now everything of mine costs 3 as well. I was like, no. But Magda allows you to circumvent so many stacks pieces that are crippling for so many other decks. And it breaks parity on them. And it wins at instant speed. And it wins without casting spells. So you can break parity on a Rule of Law. You can break parity on a 3-ball. You can break parity on all of these different things. And everyone just doesn't know what to do because of that. It has suffered after one Marchesa undefeated by the cat's out of the bag. Part of the reason I think Kubito, I believe that was his name. Sorry if I mispronounced it. Part of the reason that they won was because no one knew what Magda did. Right. And as they were going through the loop, they were like, wait, what? Can anybody?
What's happening?
What's happening right now? And they're like, oh my God, we just died and we had no idea it was coming. Yeah. And so that was a big part of it.
The Clark effect, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly you have Kark and Sakashima and the game's just over and you don't know what happened. And by the time you realize it's time to interact, it's too late.
Mhm.
They've just got you because they're 13 pieces deep in the stack and they've got you. And that's what Magda does as well. And the flexibility of it, the ability to break parity on it, the ability to win at instant speed, all those things I think is really, really good. Magda is not a super easy deck to pick up at first, but once you do pick it up, it really scales well with your skill and knowledge of the deck. And that's the reason I pretty much chose that as an A. Please remove my trader role, Red Love Discord. I really want my trader role gone.
I agree with like every point you're making, but here's why I will ultimately keep it at a B for now. It runs 8 pretty awful cards, and they're the 1-drop dwarfs.
It runs more than 8 pretty awful cards. To be fair, those are just the dwarfs.
So those are just the dwarfs.
Yeah.
So does Winota.
Right.
And she's S tier.
But here's the difference.
And I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, the difference with Winota, though, is that it runs those cards and it very quickly it very immediately turns those into better cards very quickly. Where with Winota, it takes a little bit of setup. It's a little bit slower on the jump. And for me, I think that card quality is ultimately why I don't see it as high. Like, I agree with every point you're saying, but if anybody knows anything about how I like to play decks, is I am just like, I want to play good cards like more than anything. And
you never want to be disappointed by your top deck.
Yeah. I want to have good top decks.
Yeah.
And so if we're some of that comes from playing the Rock for years and years, right? Is just being like, listen, I'm used to having better top decks than my opponents. I want to continue to do that. And so I think that's ultimately what I think holds Magda back. I think if those cards, if they print more dwarfs that are better, that
kind of
do more relevant things, anything remotely relevant, I think I would be way more willing to put this at an A, because then I can sit there and look at this and go, man, this is just synergizes across the board, has some good cards. These might not be the best cards, but it synergizes pretty well.
There definitely are some decent dwarves out there. I know that the little 1-drop ones are do nothing dwarves. They're just to make treasures. It's like a strike it rich, basically. But beyond that, there are a couple that a lot of Magda players have started running, the ones that destroy artifacts when they enter and stuff like that are also allow you to synergize. And people have started to warm up to that as Magda has tried to finally move out of the turbo territory and more into the mid-rangey territory. It's really helped the deck a lot. But I agree. I agree.
I would really like to see Dwarven Trader and Dwarven Grunt removed from the deck and replaced with just a better card.
Only Ragavan was a dwarf pirate.
I'm just I don't think I don't think those two cards add enough to your density of dwarfs that it's ultimately that important, because you're still always going for Universal Automaton anyway. So it's just play better cards. That's kind of how I feel about it. But
I think I agree with that sentiment. I think, and I understand where Ryan's coming from, where obviously there's inherent synergy. And I think the comparison with Winota is interesting, but ultimately it's a question of degree of synergy. And I think, if you look at Magda, the synergy is reasonable, and obviously you want at least that first dwarf for combo purposes. Now take sort of, I guess, the next level, which would be something like Tymna, where you can be playing Opposition Agent, Collector Oof, even your Mana Dorks, and you're just stapling draw a card onto all of those. And so that's just kind of the next level of synergy, and you get to kind of play better cards that you also then make better because of your commander. And if you take Winota as sort of the ultimate example of that, the cards themselves are not great, but each one says draw a card and make 5 mana which is like absurd.
So, well, and I think that was the other thing that I also want to point out here is I think that the vanilla creatures that you see in Winota are either 0 mana and like they cost you nothing to play. So you're effectively thinning your deck to some degree or another, or they have haste or evasion or some form of like they're
definitely bad.
Has like first strike, like they're not
Phyrexian
great.
Walker,
0/3.
But
as soon as Drowning Magistrates you play, they're terrible, right?
Yeah, but exactly. And but the Magda also suffers the same.
Yes, problem. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's where I kind of look at that and I go, I can justify it in Winota a little bit more because Winota itself can very quickly, the moment it comes down, convert those into better cards. Whereas Magda, it takes like 3 or 4 turns before you get any sort of payoff from your Dwarven Grunt.
Dwarven Grunt on its own, yes, you're right. Whereas Winota has just got a Phyrexian Walker, and a Winota can turn that into a win slowly but surely. Magda, it not card advance. Well, I mean, maybe in some ways, because you do tutor it directly onto the battlefield.
Right.
And once you do that, then you're set to go. And you don't even need to necessarily go infinite with it. Sometimes, actually, there's plenty of times when Magda will just fetch up a key silver bullet to a problem that's about to happen. And that's very frequently what Magda does nowadays.
Yeah.
And didn't used to do that. It used to be very, very turbo-y and just ran whatever it could do to turbo as fast as possible. And it doesn't do that as much anymore.
I like that it's playing like Spine of Isha and God Pharaoh's statue, and like it's playing a more stacksy game. Like I really like that approach to it.
So one of the first things you do is generate
dragons.
It runs Utvara Hellkite, or at least it did at one point, and you get to choose your dragon too. So that's fun.
That's
and some of the changelings are also dragons.
Because you fetch up
also dwarves.
Yeah, you can also fetch up. It escapes me at the moment. The one that makes all of your things changelings, and then you can just fetch up anything.
The Maskwood Nexus.
Yeah, that's it. You fetch up Maskwood. Now you can just fetch up every creature in your deck.
Right.
But I feel like that's even a more reason to just not play the derpy 1 mana dwarfs that don't do anything and just play a better 1-drop.
There might be times when Magda might steer in that direction if we get enough create treasure payoff type stuff that isn't just directly
play Goldhound.
Yes, Goldhound.
Like why aren't you playing Goldhound? Like I don't know.
There are decks that play Ancient Copper Dragon because why not? It's a great you crack 5 at the end step, get the Ancient Copper Dragon, swing, hope you get above 10, and the game is yours, man. That's so fun.
Well, moving on to the next one. I could yell about card choices for hours. We have done that previously. Next one is Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. This is everybody's favorite Dimir ninja that is the most annoying thing in the world to play against because none of your hate works against it. It completely ignores Draneth. It completely ignores Grafdigger's Cage. Like all of that stuff. It's just like, yeah, whatever. It's fine. I'm still going to come into the battlefield. So
you're never
Pongo
removing her. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like it doesn't do anything, and it doesn't add to the command tax, which is wild.
Cheats commander tax.
That is it has that Derevi effect, but it's better. Which
it's like Derevi was an infamously well-designed, popular card.
And
that they decided they needed to just double down on that.
Yeah, hold my beer.
Yeah,
Derevi's great. Hold my beer.
But so Pongo and I have it here at a B. Ryan, you're kind of looking at it a little bit stronger as an A. You do say here in your notes that you cannot build Yuriko weak. It's too strong out of the box. Kind of elaborate on that, Ryan. Like
sure.
It's you have not seen a weak one because I've seen Yuriko whiff countless times.
Yeah.
So basically the long short of it is if you build Yuriko with any synergy at all, It means if you're putting at least 5 ninjas in it, it's already strong. It cheats commander tax, like you said, and on all the other points, so I won't reiterate those. But really what it boils down to is that Yuriko is just one of those commanders that just constantly chips away at you. And in doing what it's just trying to do anyway, is weakening all of your other strategies, providing card advantage in the command zone while getting around things like Notion Thieves and stuff like that. And just breaks all the rules that is in our current meta that we use to try and stop other people's decks. Gets around Drana, gets around, draw hate, gets around all of these different things, gets around commander tax. So it's only still ever going to cost blue. And it's in arguably 2 of the best colors in our format too. So you just
that's not an argument. That it's just they are the 2 best colors. Like,
and so you just run every best card in that color and some ninjas, and you have a very formidable deck that's also quite easy to pilot. You just simply you can hand that deck to somebody who's never played Yuriko before, and they play 4 games. They'd probably win at least one of them, even never piloting it before. Because Yuriko can just get there. Because it also can play the things that Turbo Naz doesn't play. And if you try and build Yuriko strictly as Turbo Naz, I think that you kind of rob Peter to pay Paul a lot of times. Yuriko's providing card advantage in the command zone already. So put your misdirections in there, put your commandeers in there and stuff like that, because you're still casting them for free. You just have to pay them with other things, but you usually always have a full grip of cards anyway. And there's so many, like, other than the ninjas themselves, which actually got a huge boost in Kamigawa, by the way.
A lot of stuff got a huge boost in Kamigawa.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. A lot of things got a boost. Yeah. And so because of that, the ease of picking it up, the how easy it almost pilots itself, not to trivialize any skilled pilots out there. But basically you just swing sideways with ninjas. That's really good. And it chips away at the ad naus player, making the ad nauses weaker, and plays a lot of really good. Like I said, it runs the best colors in the format, cheats all this stuff. I guess I'm just repeating myself at this point, but I've never played in a pod with Yuriko where I didn't see Yuriko win at least once, because it's just raw power right into the command.
I will say it's really neat to like. I like where Yuriko is now versus where it was in previous years. I've seen it because so many people were doing the like pure into the best Turbo Naz.
Yes,
thing.
They were trying to build Demir Turbo Naz with some ninjas, and it wasn't working because they would reveal a chain of vapor off the top and a dispel.
I've seen so many people just flip over Lion's Eye Diamond, and I'm just like, why the hell is this in your deck, fam? Like, this is,
the decks that lean harder into the actual Yuriko synergy do much better, in my opinion, while still being able to do things like play Deadly Rollick.
I like that you can. I like the deck that's on the database of playing it as a controlled tempo deck. I think that's definitely like the way to go with it if you're going to be playing it. Pongo, I know you're not as high on it. So what is kind of your things that hold you back from ranking it as highly as Ryan?
So you may remember I actually had this originally rated as an A, and I was like, I kind of sat on that for a little bit, and I was like, I kind of thought back on some games that I played against Yuriko, relatively recently, and I was like, man, Yuriko has like highs and lows, like big time highs, big time lows. There are some games where you're getting those Yuriko triggers and you're revealing, the forces, the commandeers, and the table just kind of feels like it's like absolutely being held hostage. And like, it just feels impossible to win. And you're just like, okay, like, let's just get to the next game, because like, I can't beat what I've seen you have. And you have so much inevitability that like, it just feels almost pointless to continue. And then there are the games where it's like, okay, well, I'm revealing more ninjas, like more 1-drops. And I just, for whatever reason, I just can't stop revealing my like 25 plus like lands. 1-drops and lands and stuff like that. And it's just like, I'm not getting anywhere, I've got mana, I've got creatures in play. Maybe eventually I can convert to something, but it just doesn't happen in the right time frame. So where you're actually carrying out your game plan. So I think that for me, that's kind of part of it. I would say that she's certainly like at the top of the B tier, possibly, and conversely, she would have been, I guess, at the bottom of the A tier if I had left her there. It's just the sort of thing where I know that if I was playing the deck, that would really frustrate me. The fact that like there would be that kind of degree of inconsistency, largely to do with the fact that, in order to make the Yuriko engine work, I need to play all these bad cards, and I'm hoping that these bad cards are going to find me the interactive important pieces that I need to extend the game so that I can win through inevitability.
Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at with it too, is I think where I've played it the most is either in like my personal friend group, or I played against it a few times at Oktoberfest. Ara was the person who I played against it the most, and maybe it's just their build of it or what, but every time I see it get played, it's exactly what you said. It's very swingy. It's either the Billy Joel, insert Billy Joel song here, I go to extremes. It's either too high or too low. There isn't any in between. And you go ahead and sing that in your head if you are a Billy Joel fan like myself. But it's that piece where you're either hitting every major thing or you're hitting nothing and you're just spinning your wheels. And I think that's why I actually had it in my mind as a high C, low B personally, because to me, I think that inconsistency is what would be what I would consider be, I said be a ton just in that string of words. That is what holds things into the fringe tier for me, is how consistently are you doing the thing? And I think Yuriko, because it's blue-black, because it has Thassa's Oracle, gets up into B tier for me, but because of the fact that it's just so like it's either one or the other, and there's just no in the middle, and then it's saved by Thassa's Oracle, in my opinion. But I think otherwise I would look at it and I'm just like, this is a good deck that can go really exactly what Ryan said. It's going to win some amount of games. But ultimately for me, I think it's just so inconsistent with its ability to consistently put together games. Where I don't know if I would take this to a tournament and be like, feel very confident that I would make day 2. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of my thought on it.
Well, I mean, I think, when it comes to tournaments, you have to be running hot to win anyway. That's kind of just, I think, a precondition. In addition, obviously, to playing well, you need things to kind of break properly for you.
Right.
I think the last thing I want to say about Yuriko, the final thing is, in the past, I probably would have given this an A, like Ryan, along similar lines of reasoning, where, it being blue-black obviously pulls a lot of weight. But this year, like I was saying, I'm allowing myself to insert some editorialization, as it were, or, like some of my own feelings of playing the deck.
Yeah.
And as such, that's it. So I kind of had to think about it, and I was like, okay, well, very late in the game, sort of last minute. I think it was yesterday even.
Yeah, you literally just messaged me in our group chat yesterday. I just like, hey, change this rating for me.
That's it.
Thank you to all of our wonderful patrons on Patreon. Your continued support is what enables us to continue to bring you high-quality cEDH content every single week. If you want to listen to next week's episode right now, you could become a patron for as low as $2 a month and get access to the full uncut video episode right now. You will also get access to our patron-exclusive Discord server, plus the ability to submit a question to our Dear Sculpty Voice segment. So what are you waiting for? If you aren't a patron already, you can join the Sculpty family at patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors. We're moving on to the 3 and 4 and 5 pillar commanders that we're going to be talking about today in more detail. And the first one here is in Esper. It is Raffine, Scheming Seer. Ryan and Pongo have this ranked as a B tier commander. I have it ranked as an A tier commander. So Ryan, Pongo, whoever wants to take this one, why is it you kind of see this at a B tier?
Well, actually, why don't we start with you and let us know why you think
it's
it's
an
an A?
All right. Why I think it's an A.
Well, reverse card. Yeah.
Okay. You got it. So for me, part of why I think it's an A is it checks a lot of boxes for me. One is that it's pretty like accessible from the command zone. 3 mana, blue, white, black is not difficult to generate. It also has a form of evasion on it with flying. It also has Ward 1, and everybody who's played against Raffine or Tivit can tell you how annoying Ward is as a mechanic.
Yes. They put it on everything now for some reason.
Yeah,
what is up with that?
It's frustrating to play against, but it also has this ability to make your team bigger, and then has this inevitability just kind of on its own with the connive ability. And I have yet to see connive not just run the table. Every time I've ever played against it, whether it's Spleenface's version of the deck, which is kind of a white, like a Esper Weenies type deck that has a little bit of a turns reanimator package built into it. It just will eventually run you over because you're going to get buried in card advantage, and you're going to get buried by the literal like mass of cards that he has accumulated by playing these things and then building them up with the counters. Or you're playing the Adnaz Doomsday Reanimator pile, which I don't think is quite as good, but does do in like I think Esper honestly lends itself to being more control-y, which is a conversation for another day. But I think I said that before, actually, last year when we talked about Xur. We talked about how people were playing Xur as like this turbo deck, and I was like, it's not a turbo deck. Play it slower, guys.
Yeah, you were saying that about Jeskai too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of where I look at Raffine, is where I've seen it shine is when it's playing this mid-range grindy strategy, and it just buries you in card advantage. Now, where why I put it as an A instead of I think it's like a mid to low A, not a high A. And partially that's because I do think it does take a little bit of time to establish the board presence. And I think that does matter when you're talking about the meta that we're seeing here, where it's, Rog Silas, Turbo Nagilas, Godos, all of that, Winotas. When we're looking at that meta, I do think that is a detractor from it, but I do think that it is in colors that make that massage that issue a little bit. So I think that's kind of where I look at it. I think I think it is the best Esper commander by like a country mile. I think it's better than any other Esper option by like a lot. And that might be a hot take, because I know a lot of people are like Malcolm Tymna is the best one. I think Raffine is the best Esper commander or commander pair, and it's Not even close. But that's kind of my opinion on it. Get in the comments if you disagree with me. But Pongo and Ryan already disagree with me. So what are your takes? I think I'll throw it to Ryan first. Ryan, why do you disagree with? Why am I wrong?
There's not enough footage for us to get into that. Sorry.
Fair enough.
No, but seriously, really what it boils down to is depending upon what meta you're bringing it into will really scale its effectiveness. Whereas there's a lot of commanders that we talk about, like the Unanimous S Tier ones, where it doesn't matter what meta you're in. You just bring it in blind and it'll usually put in a good showing. Raffine doesn't really have that. It's a little bit more meta dependent. If you've got a meta that just doesn't favor Raffine very well, it flounders real hard. And because of that, you have to do a little bit more adapting to the meta, and you can't just play it blind. So you usually do have to adapt it to your playgroup. But Raffine also doesn't lend itself super well to adaptation either, because you do want to kind of do the connive thing. You do want to kind of do that kind of stuff. And that stuff is powerful. There is no doubt about that. No one's disagreeing with that. But if you're doing it in a way where it is at the max efficiency, there's just some metas that just aren't going to be able to put up, that aren't going to be able to, it's not going to be able to put up a good showing against. So that's part of it. But also the other part, I think, is once again what you're saying, and what I said earlier is that Raffine is built two different ways. Some people try and build it as Esper Adnaz, and it doesn't do that very well.
Esper just doesn't do Adnaz well.
No, it doesn't.
My 2 cents on it. You need to be in red if you're doing turbo Adnaz.
Nowadays, I agree with you. I think that you can get away with some other stuff too. But yeah, on the whole, usually it's really great to have red. But if you're in Adnaz and you're going really hard into Adnaz, like Raffine doesn't really accomplish that super well. And so those that are using the Raffine, like I think it's the Doomsday list or the Razaketh list or whatever, it's trying to do 3 different things, and the commander's giving you some selection, but not quite. And it just flounders a lot because of it. The Weenies one or whatever, I think that's on the database currently.
Yeah.
That one does a lot better, in my opinion.
I mean, I really like that. Like, you build up the small board, you use these small creatures to build up your board state, and then you're gonna be using that to reanimate things out of your graveyard or bring things back to your hand and take turns and stuff like that. Like, I think that strategy is exactly where this color pot, like this slice of the color pie shines. And like that's part of why I like it like so much, is because I predominantly see that version of the deck, to be fair.
Okay. Yeah, see, I've seen the Raza Doomsday one or whatever, and that one I just was not impressed with. And I think I've watched the one with the Weenies, and that one does perform better. But once again, like I said, you definitely have to have a knowledge of your meta to go in and see it, have it actually perform. But so that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree like a lot with what Ryan just said there, where it kind of feels like when you look at the list, they feel very pre-boarded for mid-range metas. And, you know, I sort of maybe feel like I'm being a bit too harsh giving it a B, and I could see myself bumping it up to an A potentially, just because of how powerful it is in specifically those spots. It is very, like, it does go over the top of a lot of other mid-range and stacks decks. And you know, beyond that, it's also that's the kind of thing that I enjoy doing. So like I could see myself giving it a better rating as a result. But it's true though that, you know, if I was to bring this to a tournament, I would be kind of, you know, concerned about how I'm tuning the deck on the one hand, and then on the other hand, also concerned about you know, whether or not I would be, you know, falling into the right matchups for a lot of the card inclusions in the deck. It just kind of plays a lot of, again, just chunkier cards that will win when the game goes longer, but you need to navigate the game to that point. And I don't know that it necessarily has fantastic tools to do that. So it is somewhat reliant on other people at the table bailing you out.
Right.
While you're kind of building towards that inevitable late game.
I see what you're saying. That's fair. I think that my experience by watching the tournament scene develop over the past year is that the tournament scene tends to be a grindier scene than what people think it is. Because if you recall, like Punt City, everybody thought that it was going to be like, because I remember having this conversation with Michael, is that a lot of people were expecting that to walk in there and it be turbo, 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 turbo. And then it ended up being like the stacks meta. And so it's one of those things where I keep seeing this play over and over again where people are like, Turbo's going to come out and it's going to do great and it's going to be really good. And then it ends up being this mid-range, grindy meta. And I think, and this is like a whole conversation we could have about why tournament metas shake out that way. But I think in large part that is because you go in and it's a blind meta, and mid-range is pretty good into blind metas because they're very adaptable. And so that's why I think I would feel really comfortable taking Raffine in to a tournament setting, because of the fact I know going into this, more than likely going to end up being pretty grindy. These games aren't going to end very fast. People are going to be playing a lot more tight, but you're going to see people play a little bit differently than they do on servers. And so I think you're going to be able to place, I mean, hell, Tivit just won Mox Masters, right? So I think that in and of itself should show you the power of where that is. And honestly, I think I might be underrating Tivit, honestly, after seeing how it performed there. And for me, I just think that if I'm sitting down, number one, I'm playing Esper as a mid-range control strategy. So I'm automatically going, all right, I don't think Tymna and Malcolm are very good at that personally, because I think they draw a lot of heat immediately. And I think that I'm not even going to get into that. I'm going to save that for my Survivor episode where we talk about deck selections.
I do think I'm comfortable bumping this up to an A, actually.
Hell yeah.
Me till I die. I will not budge. I will not budge. But now I have to defend my position.
Well, so let me just kind of add to what Callahan was saying, which is it has been my experience and even through my data collection and just my intuition and also from conversations I've had with people that despite what a lot of people may think and despite how a lot of people are perhaps tuning their decks, we are in one of the slowest cEDH formats in recent memory. And so I do feel like, there is room to be playing decks like this that are a little bit more mid-rangey. And certainly this is a deck that has great tools to do that. So yeah. I mean, it's a deck that's great colors. I mean, so,
you know that Michael Levine and Charles are going to be at Dr. Michael Levine and Charles are going to be at whatever tournament you're at, and they're going to be playing some form of stacks just off the bat. So two people out of the field already are playing a mid-range control strategy, so you already know you can go over the top of them at minimum. And they're not even going to be the entirety of the fact that there are a ton of people playing stacks into these metas, because they're trying to react to the turbo decks that they're expecting. So if you go in with a deck like this, I think you're just prepared to just go over the top of these things. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Somebody prove me wrong. Next list, we're going to be talking about, we're moving into Grixis. And we have Armix Kraum, which is Mikey's baby. And you, Ryan, and you, Pongo, have this as an A tier. I have this as a B tier commander. Again, you guys, what are your thoughts on why this is an A tier commander?
I guess Ryan, it's my turn to take this one, or
I think Pongo,
Pongo,
you go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, this checks the boxes in terms of colors, right? You've got Grixis colors, and so you've got blue, black plus red. And sort of by my estimation, if you're trying to go fast, those are the 3 best colors. I don't know if that's a particularly hot take, uh, but yeah. So, I mean, you've got that box checked off. But in addition to that, what I really like about this combination is, Armix can solve a good number of problems. That other, Grixis commanders don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to solve out of the command zone. Um, so I do like having the removal in the command zone as a way to deal with some of the hate bears. And again, some of the decks you were even talking about, Callahan, just previously. Um, like the mono white Heliod's, or the mono white flavor, whatever
Right.
whatever Charles decides he's playing today.
He brought Owl last time.
Yeah.
Whatever he's bringing this time,
Exactly.
whatever mono white deck he's interested in.
But and there's kind of a resurgence too in people playing like green white stacks decks. You're trying those out, and naturally Winota is sort of an omnipresent force that you need to be prepared for. And so I think that having kind of a way to deal with Winota specifically in the command zone is a very attractive thing to have when you're playing these colors, just as a thing that you can kind of fall back on.
Yeah. Brian, where do you land on it? And do you kind of agree with Pongo or that, or do you have even stronger opinions than Pongo?
No, I think that he pretty much hit the nail on the head. The only other things I'd probably add was when Mike and I were driving back from Punt City, he had just won it with Winota.
Right.
And we were talking about Grixis and how it was doing, and kind of going back to what you were saying about Raffine and walking into these blind metas. Everyone thinks it's all going to be Turbo Nas. And because it's going to be Turbo Nas, I need to do something to counteract Turbo Nas. And so I'm going to bring a mid-range something deck. I'm going to run Collector Oofs in my deck and all this other stuff. Well, this allows you to battle through those mid-range or those blind metas in a way that has almost no opportunity cost. All I have to do is turn sideways and remove your, remove the stacks piece, remove the blocker, remove the whatever. And it's not like Grixis doesn't play artifacts, and it's not like Armix isn't an artifact himself. So if nothing else, you're killing their Ragavan, at a minimum.
It's not free removal, right? You do have to discard a card. So
but still,
I'm not excited about removing a Ragavan.
I think my biggest question is
that
like,
you would suggest that.
I think my biggest question is like how I think as a reanimator strategy, I think it's real strong because it's just like,
I think as a breach strategy, it's real strong. It's like Darcy, it's like Channeler. If you're in breach, which Grixis is in breach, and if you're in Armix Kraum, you're usually on breach. But this allows you to start fueling your breach right away, which is really nice. And you're getting rid of people's hate pieces or their blockers or whatever it might be. And I think that is super advantageous. And I was talking to Mike about that, and we had agreed that if somebody brought Armix Kraum to Punt City, there's a non-zero chance they would have won it because there was that much mid-range stuff. Dranith Magistrates, Collector Oofs, because everyone was trying to battle Turbo Nas. And as such, what was going on was that everyone was sitting in these mid-range pods with Collector Oofs and no one else. And the Grixis players would sometimes just straight fold. If they couldn't get to a win before the Collector Oof hit, they were just really kind of struggling to get where they needed to go because they were very much, the silver bullets were working against them. And Armix allows you to still keep pulling ahead. Put out your Armix, you kill that, whatever it is, and get into that game in a way that allows you to continue to, number one, fuel your breach, number two, get rid of their creature or whatever it might be, and then still execute your Grixis strategy. So that's how I feel about it. Kind of going back to what
y'all sold me on that, honestly. Like, I mean, so here's the thing. I played a lot of Arden Kraum, right? And I think Arden Kraum is like the control version of Armix Kraum. Like, if that makes sense. It plays on a very similar axis of, you have Kraum to get that card advantage. You have the other partner to kind of enable either removal or the, whatever. I like genuinely like just listening to you guys talk. I think you are 100% correct on that. of just, it is one of those things where I'm a big believer in mid-range. And so having a deck that can push you over the top like that, I like a lot. Now, I will say that I do think Raffine is better as a mid-range deck. Just on the axis of, I think decks that are in Grixis trying to play mid-range, and this is why I put Kess lower. I think decks right now that are trying to play mid-range in Grixis are running into this conflict of, do I lean into the mid-range or do I lean into my breach and my Naws strategy? And when you straddle the line, I think it dilutes both of them. And that is probably my biggest complaint about Armix Kraum, is that I think it straddles the line of Turbo Naws and mid-range. And because of that, I don't think it does either better than, other options. But I also think that it does the mid-range thing well enough that it can overcome that a little bit. Because it just has a good floor, right? You're talking about like Armix being a removal piece. Yeah, I think you guys bring up excellent points. I'm willing to change my rating on that. You've convinced me. Next commander up here, we've got a lot of Grixis folks. It is Inalla Archmage Ritualist, and this is a card that we've talked about extensively here. We have talked about it year after year after year. So if you want our deep thoughts on this card, you can definitely go back to previous years. But Ryan has it at a B. Pongo and I have it as an A. And Ryan, what has it you putting it out as? Why are you closer to where I was previously on it? Because I'm higher on it now than I was in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. There's nothing new to be said about Inalla that hasn't been said everywhere over and over again. It suffers the Kess problem. That's really what it boils down to. I ask a lot of my command zone, and Inalla has this thing where it's like, yeah, I got this and I got that. Do I win? And everyone's like, yeah, that was great. Good job. You shuffle up, you play again, which does make it powerful if you can get to that. It leans really hard into that to try and win as fast as possible. So sometimes you play some suboptimal cards that are dead in your hand otherwise. But really what it is it suffers the Kess problem to me. I demand a lot of my command zone, and Inalla doesn't do in Grixis what I demand of Grixis nowadays. And that's really basically it. It's still powerful. Like it's not weak. It can win really quickly. Everyone knows that. But that's really all it is.
Yeah. I think for me, because that was kind of my thought on it previously, and I've now kind of gone to the other side of the fence where now I look at it and I'm like, because I've just played against it enough now that I have really just come around to this card, or I've seen people play it enough, either in the MLC where, we've seen Cam, turn one, he's going last, wins in the first season. And I think that's one of those things where I've really come around to this card of looking at it is in the reason I disagree with it doesn't do what I want it to do in Grixis is that I think I would agree with that normally. And I agree with you on Kess on that point, but I think it's doing a different enough thing that I'm willing to look past that and go, okay, so what is it? It's doing this thing really well. And because of that, I think like the fact that I never have to cast my commander a single time and I'm still getting advantage from it is absurd. Like it's a stupid mechanic that shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
But like
everyone agrees Eminence was a mistake.
It is a wild card, but that's kind of my feeling on it. Pongo, I'm sure similar feelings along those lines.
More or less. I would say I don't know that I've really changed my position as far as Inalla is concerned compared to last year in particular. The one point where I would perhaps disagree with Ryan is having seen, for example, Spleenface Morgan piloting this deck, he plays like a slightly different version of the deck, with like a few more wizards for synergy and for value. And like I've seen some messed up stuff happen with dual caster mage at instant speed.
Yeah.
And and that kind of like, I don't know, tickles my pickle, as it were. So
please don't say that ever again. Oh my god.
Oh, why not? It's the best.
Just for you.
I felt my pickle shrivel. Jesus. Oh my god. No, but I agree with you. It's like Morgan and Mikey's builds of Inalla have just completely sold me on that card or on that deck. Like, it's just like, I just see it be so consistently good that I'm just like, God, like, how do you deal with this? But next card on the list is Grixis. We're looking at Tevesh Kraum. And this is one, again, where you both have it as A, and I have it as B. And sell me on this. Is this an Armix thing?
No. You are defending your position.
Am I defending this position?
We are in the A. You're in the B. You defend your.
I'll tell you what. I'm now going. I'm going to look at this and I'm going to compare it to Armix Kraum, and I'm going to ask you both a question regarding these two commanders, and I think I'm going to base it off this because this is kind of how I felt about it before, and because I kind of thought Armix Kraum was better than Tevesh Kraum to begin with, anyhow. But if it was you guys and you were going into a tournament, would you rather be playing Tevesh Kraum or Armix Kraum, Ryan?
Armix.
Pongo?
Tymna.
Well, that wasn't an option, right?
Yeah, I would probably I would prefer to play Armix.
Yeah.
But it's like it's close, right? Like they're not that far off from one another.
I think there's honestly, it's if you build Tevesh Kraum as more of a mid-range ish Grixis thing, it actually excels very well. Because you can really lean harder into the mid-range part and do really busted stuff with it, because you just drown people in advantage, because you have two advantage engines in the command zone. And it got even better with Displacer Kitten when it came out.
Yeah.
Because now you can flicker your Tevesh and you can keep doing that kind of stuff.
It's mainly that for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've just seen it as a mid-range list do very, very well. If you're just talking about Armix, and if you're just talking about taking the 98 and swapping Tevesh for Armix, yeah, I would probably take Armix, because you're not adapting the other 98 to the Tevesh strategy.
I just think here's kind of where I'm at, is you're running into an issue where you're playing two quite expensive commanders that you got to ramp into, but you can only ramp into one, right? Because realistically, you're using your
Jeweled Lotus,
or your ritual or whatever it is. So you're picking one or the other. And for me, I think those types of commanders are better paired with lower costed commanders that offset that issue. So like Kraum with Armix, I kind of like a little bit more. Kraum, I like a little bit more with like Arden or something like that. And I'm going to continue to talk about how great Arden is. But Tevesh, to me, the only reason I didn't put this in a C tier, honestly, is because of the fact that it's in Grixis. Grixis is just so goddamn powerful that it can kind of overcome that a little bit. But like, I don't like Tevesh Thrasios. I don't think it's like, I think it's fine, but I'm not in love with it. I'm not in love with any of the Tevesh lists. I thought they were cute when they came out, and we discovered that Tevesh was better than we originally thought. But I have a hard time. I have yet to see a Tevesh list blow me away and really separate itself from the rest of the field. And they always just kind of feel like a mid-range pile And, I kind of have this argument is if I built the same mid-range pile for Tevesh Kraum or Armix Kraum, I still think Armix Kraum would play it better. And that's just kind of how I feel about it. Like, I don't think Tevesh is, that much better than, like, it doesn't remove my opponent's stuff. So it's just more card draw. Why am I not playing Tymna? That's better card draw. Like, that's just kind of like, I don't know. Like, it's just, I think there are better options for a partner that you can put with Kraum that are going to complement what Kraum is doing in a better way than what Tevesh does. Because here's the other thing. Like, Tevesh and Thrasios at least makes some semblance of sense to me, because I can see a world where I want to sack my Thrasios potentially to draw extra cards. When in God's name are you sacking your Kraum to Tevesh?
You're sacking other people's Kraum because you ultimated Tevesh.
Yeah, for real.
I've seen it happen once. Is the thing though, and I've played against the card tons, but I've seen it all once. But that's because everybody's seen it all once, and then everybody goes, "Okay, we got to keep the Tevesh down. You can't let that Tevesh get out of hand." And so I just.
But it's still drawing cards like while it's happening, right? So
sure, but so does Tymna, and it does it at a better clip.
I mean, I agree that the comparison with Tymna makes it look unattractive, right? That was kind of the first thing that I said right out of the gate, more or less. But I still, and I think that keeps it perhaps out of S tier. But does that keep it out of A tier? No, probably not.
Sure,
right?
But this is my thing is like. What is it doing uniquely for card draw that you couldn't just do with, like, for mid-range and card draw that you couldn't just do in Tymna Kraum, or better with Armix Kraum? Like, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, I think Tevesh is a better card advantage engine in many situations than Kraum. There's like a lot of board states where Tevesh is more powerful at generating card advantage, and people can also play around Kraum to some extent as well. So I'm not.
Nobody does though. That's the thing. People
that's
people
because
are
of your
greedy
irresponsible meta.
Well,
nobody.
That's the thing. People
in our meta, in the team turn 3 meta,
yes,
people are like, I don't feed the Kraum, but like when you go out to the tournament scene, you see people in the wild, dude. My Kraum gets fed every fucking time. Like, I don't know. It's just.
What I think is really great about Tevesh Kraum, and I'm not saying that this is the second coming of Christ or anything like that. It's not S tier by any stretch. Really what it is that it allows me to adapt to my pod. I've got a bunch of Tymnas. My Tevesh comes out first because everyone wants to attack Tevesh versus attacks me and not get their card draw off of it. And so everyone, just like you said, says, we need to keep that Tevesh down. Don't want to ultimate that Tevesh. That means game over for us. So what they do is they all attack the Tevesh. He has his own blockers built in, and has his and so they're not attacking you, and you are on ad naus. So your life total is getting preserved with the Tevesh on the battlefield. He has his own blockers. It's harder to get through to him. Everyone's not playing low and wide strategies. And if I'm in a meta that warrants more spell slinging, or a pod that warrants more spell slinging, I'll put Kraum out instead. I like having that choice in there.
That's fair.
That's what I like.
That's super fair. I don't know. I guess I'm just super low on Tevesh. Like, I think I spiked on it where I definitely like Pongo. You remember
last year we were pretty high on Tevesh.
Yeah. I've really come back down to earth on it. I feel like I think I was really high on it because I think the journey for me with Tevesh was the preview season of, like, we didn't even talk about it on our set review. That was a 2-part, like 3-hour set review. Nobody paid any attention to it. Then Rebel did a thing with it, and then people started picking it up and innovating and doing different stuff with it. Then people got really high on it. And I feel like I've come back down to earth on it, where now I'm just like, it's fine. Like, that's why I think it's B, almost C tier, where it fits into that. It's fine. I think it's playable. It's going to do a thing. It's not terrible, but I think there are better, more optimal or good, options out there that I would rather be playing. And, especially like I felt that way before you sold me on bumping Armix Kraum up to A. I feel that way even more now because I liked Armix Kraum more at a B tier over another B tier commander. And I don't know. That's how I feel about it. Roast me in the comments. It's fine.
Somebody really doesn't like Tevesh. Got it.
It's not that I don't like it. It's just that I think it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's fine.
You think that it belongs in the fringe tier.
Yeah, exactly.
Awfully close if you ask me. It's awfully close if you ask me. But
I took it to SCG Con Columbus and played cEDH all weekend, went 7-0 with it.
Wow, what a flex.
It does work. It does work.
Way to go, Ryan.
Yeah.
But again, that's also why I put it up into B or put it at B, is because I just think like Grixis can just carry you so far sometimes off of that.
Exactly.
Because it's just the colors are so good. Next on our list is Malcolm Vial Smasher. This is a list that kind of fell out of favor after Hullbreacher got banned. And then has started cropping back up, and we haven't talked about specific partner pairs in the past. We've only talked about the partner itself. And so this year we're, kind of evaluating it a little bit differently. So this is kind of the first time we're really taking a look at the partner pairings, actually. But you guys have Grixis Pirates at A. I have it at B. And do you want me to defend my position again? Or
no, we can start this.
Okay.
Yeah. Can probably figure out your position from your previous comments.
What do you guys think?
Well, this one's even worse because it doesn't draw cards. So obviously Callahan's like, I'm surprised this one's not in C, right?
Yeah, I'm surprised it's even on the list. Surprised it just didn't omit it. Yeah. Didn't even let us evaluate it.
Yeah. Ryan, Pongo, what do you think on
long short of it is it's Teamer Pirates and Grixis. So you have some of the best tutors. I mean, that's what you do. It's Dark Malcolm, and it just does the Teamer Pirates thing so well. Mm-hmm. Giving Teamer Pirates access to black gave it such a boon. Gave it a bunch of things like reanimation strategies now, and gave it all the best tutors, and it just really kind of sent it into the A tier for me.
Yeah, Pongo, what about you? What put it up into A for you?
That's interesting. I agree with Ryan sort of in the abstract, but I think when you compare it to like Teamer Pirates, it's funny how going from green to black, you don't actually get, in my opinion, like quite as much as you expect along the Malcolm axis. Because like you lose the green tutors and you get the black tutors. So you kind of like either end up with fewer tutors or like kind of the same amount, just because of like how many good green tutors there are for creature-based combos. But
maybe I should say more specifically, you gain a lot more resiliency.
Yes,
well, you say. So
you gain a whole like other angle of attack, which is something that I appreciate in all of my decks. So I agree with that aspect of what you're saying, Ryan. Where you go from Teamer to Grixis, and now all of a sudden you're adding Adnaw's Breach, and you're adding, like you were saying, the reanimation package. So you get a little bit more resilience, if you need to reattempt your Malcolm lines. So
you can do the Malcolm Glenhorn thing, or that didn't work out and so got exiled. That's fine. I'll just Breach Thoracle.
Yeah, exactly.
Breach Brain 3 Thoracle. That's also in here.
So that's it. It's just kind of, it's blue black with like a 1-card combo, and so that's very close to kind of just the Najila recipe. It's hard to not be in at least A tier when you're doing that kind of thing.
I guess for me, I like agree with all the points you're making. I see it as more of a B tier. And it's not because of like any of the things I said before about like card draw or anything like that. Like I think it does what it does fine. My kind of feelings on it ultimately is that I think where I'm at is that I just think Malcolm Tana is better. Like if I was going to pick which one of the two, which Malcolm deck I was going to play, Malcolm Tana or Malcolm Vial, I'm picking Malcolm Tana. Like every single time. I'd much prefer to be on the green strategy that gives me access to stuff like Allosaurus Shepherd and Destiny Spinner and things that can protect my combo a little bit more efficiently, or maybe not efficiently, but effectively. I just like the Teamer Shell for Malcolm a lot more than I like the Grixis one, where I think the Grixis one, again, I think kind of does the thing where it has its foot in the Turbo Nas pool and it has its other foot in the the Malcolm Glinthorn pool. And I don't think it does both particularly well. I think it does both fine. Because again, like we said about Tevesh Kraum, you're in Grixis, baby. It can only be so bad. But like at the same time, I'm also just I feel like it doesn't do either strategy particularly well. And I guess maybe I'm just wrong on this, but I just hold Malcolm Vial a little bit lower than maybe Ian has just ruined my perception of the deck because he's just kind of sold his stocks on it. But I don't know. That's kind of where I land
feel like
on
an Ian
Vial.
deck to me, like at all.
Yeah.
So I can kind of understand where Ian in particular would not be super high on the deck, but
well, he was like the original person who made the deck and ended up like not doing the list anymore because he just was off the list.
Well, yeah, but that's kind of what I'm saying though. Like,
yeah,
it's not to say that Ian couldn't brew the deck. I think that the deck brews itself in a lot of respects, especially if you're just going Turbo Nas, I'm adding Glinthorn Buccaneer. But and this is not to disparage Ian in any way, but I think that Ian has a preference in terms of play style, types of decks that he likes to play, and I don't know that this would be like that kind of deck. Which is not to say that Ian doesn't have range, because Ian also plays Roger Silas, right? So he obviously also plays the Turbo Nas type of strategies. But all this to say that I don't know that I've seen Ian really strongly gravitate towards those.
Yeah.
And compared to more mid-rangey decks.
Yeah, and I mean, and maybe that's just my preference also sullying my opinion on it. You know what I mean? Like my preference and how like the decks I like to play, where I think, it makes a reasonable amount of sense why I would much prefer to play Malcolm Tana if you know anything about my play style over Malcolm Vial Smasher. Like me wanting to play Teamer over Grixis, like should make a lot of sense to a lot of people. But speaking of Roger Silas, next card or deck on our tier list here, as we're kind of moving here towards the end, is Rograkh Silence. And this is a deck that Pongo, on our very first gameplay episode, turn 1, seat 1, wins the game off of the most insane Jessica's Will I've ever seen. And
good times.
And
I've never.
We were going to showcase all
since.
these decks, and you just had the nuts. And I will never forget Cobble sitting in the gameplay recording of going, "Well, I guess we aren't going to see my hand." It was just like he had this really cool opener, and he was like, "I guess we don't get to do it, so never mind."
Yeah, that was wild.
But so I have it. Ryan and I have it at an A, and this is actually the first time Pongo has disagreed with Ryan and I. So Pongo, what is your kind of take on Roger Silas? What makes you push it up into an S tier?
Yeah, so this is the first time you and Ryan have agreed, but not the first time I've disagreed with either of you.
Fair enough.
So why is it an S tier for me? I mean, I can kind of preempt why you would both put it into A tier. Ultimately, why is it an S tier for me? The big reason is that it's just a deck that you need to respect. And I feel like if I'm not
Mhm.
putting in S tier, then people might get the wrong idea. Someone has to put it in S tier so that the people listening to this episode understand when this deck is in your pod, you need to respect it. You need to mulligan appropriately. You need to
Yeah.
navigate those first 2 turns, and then you can play a normal game of Magic. And like the Roger player is sad, and you need to make them sad. Like that's important.
Yes.
They need to grow.
I
They need
mean,
to grow
I-
up, and you need to help
I
them.
did that. I did that in an Arden Kraum game where I was playing Arden Kraum, and I mulliganed to a turn 1 Arden Skullclamp hand, specifically because I knew they were playing Rograkh turn 1. And every time they played Rograkh, Skullclamp was going on that Rograkh, baby. And they just never got to get anything established because I just kept putting like their Rograkh ended up costing them like 6 mana at one point. And I was just like, you're not getting access to this. You're just going to draw me cards.
It's interesting because that's that helps, sure, but it might not actually be the axis.
I don't think that's the answer for every deck.
Right.
I think that's an answer for like Arden decks specifically. But
it suffers the Godo problem. Get through the first 2 turns, and then you can play Magic. Godo has the same problem. Get through the first 2 turns and disrupt the Godo, and now we can start playing. Roger Silas has the same thing.
Yeah. That's ultimately why I have it here at A. Is it's like, listen, this thing is explosive. It's really fast. You're gonna catch people with it, but God, I have never seen this thing be able to recover from being stopped. I've never seen it recover. Like
it is super fragile. Yep. It's fast. It is super fast. No one is arguing that. It's just a little bit more fragile.
It's like that really athletic wide receiver you have on your team who's like the fastest guy on the field. You're never going to have a better weapon than that guy when he's healthy because he's so injury prone. Like
absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
James is listening. James will know what I'm talking about. All right. It's my goodness. He's the Anthony Davis. That's what Rograkh Silas is. The Anthony Davis of I'm mixing my metaphors now, but it's the Anthony Davis of Commander decks. It's super great, one of the greatest basketball players out there if they were healthy. And that's kind of how I feel about Rog Silas, is that if this thing could continue doing the powerful, fast stuff through the mid game to late game, I would push it to S tier immediately.
It's like Legacy Reanimator, right? Like I played Legacy Reanimator, or rather I have, but I haven't played a lot of Legacy recently, where it's like, if I could choose my opponents and or if I could make it so that like they just don't know how to mulligan ever, then I would be playing the best deck in the format, right? But the second that they're like, okay, I'm gonna mulligan to, turn 1 interaction or like turn 0 interaction, then like, oh, okay, my deck like is no longer obscene, right? Like obscenely powerful, obscenely fast, doing a crazy broken thing. So it's so good in a vacuum, like insanely powerful in a vacuum. And I like that because, like I was saying, I play Legacy Reanimators, so that style of gameplay appeals to me at times, for sure. But against really competent opponents who respect what you're doing, you don't get to hog all the fun, right? Like they're going to try to steal some of your fun, and that sucks.
Yeah, I mean, and it's even harder to do that in Commander, where you have 3 opponents and then you reveal what your commanders are, and people immediately know what you're doing when you're on Rog Silas.
Right.
And
you don't get game 1 for free, basically. Like
you've gotta be able to outplay your opponents. And I have seen Rog Silas be able to just go faster than, because people just don't mulligan well. But I've also seen it where people mulligan correctly, and it spins its wheels. It tries to go off once or twice in the first 3 turns, and then once you get past turn 3, it just sits there. And
you're playing a 3-player pod.
Yeah, and it runs like 26 lands. Like I like it a lot. I think it's a very good deck. I don't think it's S tier, but definitely respect the fuck out of that when it's in your pod.
Definitely.
Next commander on our list is, if we're finally getting out of Grixis. Now we're moving over into Korvold, the Jund commander that we all know. And Ryan and Pongo gave it an A. I gave it a C. And I'm pretty low on Korvold these days.
Clearly.
Fringe
commander.
Honestly.
How popular is this commander on EDH rec? Just by the way.
I mean, it's popular in casual commander. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the last time I saw somebody playing Korvold in cEDH.
You obviously do not play with Jamaican dude that much.
That's correct. I don't play with the Shawnee.
His Treasure Storm deck is absolutely insane.
I think that's ultimately my thought is I think like it's really good and like it's super powerful, but it just like I think part of why I put it in Fringe is because it it is literally just a Fringe commander because nobody plays it except like a handful of people. And if I were going to put everything that I thought was really good into every meta, like I'd have Arden Kraum higher, right? But I am like one of 5 people who play that deck. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say to put it on a tier list and go ahead and say like it's all these things. For me, it's, Fringe just based on that alone of it's not something you're going to see very often. And I feel like Korvold's very similar, where if you're going to see a Korvold or a Jund Turbonaz deck these days, I feel like you're either seeing Dargo Ikra or you're seeing Rograkh Ikra. And I have seen Korvold kind of fall off since Braden left cEDH, honestly. And I think that's ultimately why I put it in C tier. I think it's still just as powerful as it's ever been, but I don't see it enough to say that it's a high ranking commander because it doesn't have enough results for me to be like, yeah, it's great. It's amazing. It's great on paper, but as far as to my knowledge, it's Shawnee who plays the deck, right? So I that's kind of where I'm at with it. But
here's a little fun fact though.
Yeah.
If you go on the EDH rec Korvold page and you sort by expensive, there's 1,000 decks. If you go on the Roger Silas page on EDH rec and you sort by expensive, there's 47.
Okay. I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
from a results perspective.
No, but from is it a Fringe deck or do people play this deck? Yeah.
But here's the other thing. When you go, but I'm asking from a tournament standpoint, it just to me, and maybe that's just part of why I've thought about it in this regard, is I can't think of the last tournament I've seen where I've seen Korvold represented in any capacity. I could tell you the last tournament I've seen that had a Jund Rograkh deck represented, which is like the last 3 of them. But I mean, even Ashani isn't playing Korvold into these tournaments, right? Like I just don't see it getting played enough to say that it's not Fringe, I guess is my thought on it.
I think Korvold also suffers the new toys problem.
Yeah.
Where this is a couple years old now, getting a little long in the tooth. Even though it's still a good commander, everyone wants to play with the new toys. What's coming out in Streets of New Capenna? What's coming out in Dominaria and all this other stuff? And people put this deck aside to try a new thing because they love to brew new stuff. And so I always call it the new toy. Yeah, people like to play with new toys. They like to play with the shiny things. And so the metas will usually kind of shift back and forth on that. And a lot of people mistake that for being not good anymore.
Yeah.
When in fact it usually isn't that case. People just they wanted to try the partners, or they wanted to try the New Capenna stuff, and that's where you see things drop off, even though they may not have actually dropped in power level at all.
Yeah. I mean that's why I have Zur in Fringe. I think Zur is still just as good as it's ever been. But I also, because again, I've seen people starting to play it in a more controlling fashion, playing it to the strength of its colors. But I don't see it enough for me to be like, yeah, this is a B tier commander or an A tier commander. I just think it's like I from a power level perspective, it's absolutely up there. I definitely agree with you on that. But I guess I guess some of my evaluation is how are you going to see this when you go to Punt City, when you go to Oktoberfest, when you go to these events? Are you going to see this? And I was just like, I don't think it's very likely you're going to see Korvold. So, I mean,
I think to some extent, like a lot of the people who would go to tournaments like that are a little bit more invested in the format, and subsequently might fall into kind of like what Ryan was talking about, or else they might just gravitate towards decks with blue as a result, which probably sort of self-select some of the Korvold decks out of the pool. But I think that if you're talking about kind of like the broader, worldwide cEDH metagame, people really like their like commander oriented strategies, and they really like their big fu dragons, and I think Korvold kind of has
certainly came over from casual, and it was a really good segue because they were 50% of the way there
exactly.
anyway.
And so I think that Korvold is interestingly, this is kind of how I feel about Korvold, where it's kind of like it is what the Gitrog monster used to be before we got like crazy good red cards. In the sense that like the Gitrog monster used to be a pretty big boogeyman of the format. But obviously, there was like, fast blue decks that people played. There was 5-color decks like Tazri and Najil a little bit later that people played. That I would say sort of pound for pound were probably a little bit stronger. But their reputations kind of like precede them to some extent. And I think they also have just like a lot of appeal in the broader player base. And I think that Korvold certainly is that. And, it just so happens that, dragons and like giant like nightmare toads are like kind of similar, at least if you squint your eyes a little bit. So I don't know. I feel like, it kind of just, to me, that makes sense that like Korvold is sort of like, the more modern Gitrog. There we go. I managed to get our mention of the Gitrog monster. So Ryan, if you have any comments you need to throw in here, the ball's in your court now.
Oh, okay. So since we're talking about Gitrog, I have no comments at this point.
So looking at the next little bit here, I think these are ones that we could pretty easily go through. But before that, we have Naya, which is Rocco Cabaretti Caterer. And Pongo and I have this as a B. Ryan, you have it as an A. Ryan, what's your kind of thoughts on this bad boy?
So they're having a tutor in the command zone of any creature onto the battlefield has unbelievable untapped potential.
Yeah.
It can be almost anything. And it's flexible. So somebody Rocco's for 2, everyone's like, oh, he's going to grab a dockside. And then they don't. And they grab something else. And you're like, I had no idea that was coming. And it can consistently still always catch you off guard because it's so flexible in how it can play. And because of its flexibility, it can also pivot really, really well as well. I have seen Rocco consistently win turn 2 and 3, like, which seems so crazy for this X commander in the command zone. But I've seen it do it and just win the game. I've also seen it be able to be resilient enough to last the late game and still win. And so I love that it's still kind of online at more stages in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you can tutor up your combo piece in the command zone or whatever toolbox thing that you might need at the time from the command zone. And there's also something to be said, which I haven't really mentioned yet since we've been talking today, is that there's definitely a fun factor to it. You can kind of build it to have a little bit more of your pet cards in there. You're like, oh, I really love the Emil Dockside combo, but I also really love doing the Vivian thing. And that's kind of a thing that some people do. And the fact that it can pivot on so many axes and that there's still so much untapped potential in there and still just good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see Rocco decks just flounder around and lose the game all the time. They usually are really good. They do really good things.
Yeah.
Plus, it also runs Godo Helm, and I really want that trader roll off there. Please remove my trader roll from the Red Love Discord.
Oh goodness.
But essentially, that's one of the reasons why I think it kind of bumps into an A, because I think over time, as more and more people brew it, it's just going to get better and better and better.
Yeah. Pongo, you and I both put it in a B. Why did you put it in a B?
It's a high B for me, to be clear.
Yeah.
I think sort of some of my issues with Rocco are I've played against it a decent amount now, and I've noticed somehow it always seems to fall into problems with mana, where like for whatever reason it just either doesn't have enough mana or it has the wrong colors of mana, and like you wouldn't expect that to be a problem in Naya, but for whatever reason in that deck it ends up being a problem like surprisingly often in the games that I played against it. Beyond that, I've also found that for a deck that's like ostensibly a stacks or like mid-rangey deck, it's surprisingly soft to a lot of stacks effects as well. Particularly the Dranith Magistrates, the opposition agents, as we've talked about earlier. But also, in many cases, rule of laws, and occasionally, the collect roof type effects even. Now, naturally, you do have lines around those, but again, it's sort of like a compounding problem where if you're already stumbling sort of along one axis, whether it's perhaps you don't have enough mana, or perhaps there's not enough like mana rocks in place, or your dockside lines aren't going to be explosive enough, and now we're introducing like a rule of law into the equation, or we're introducing a Dranith Magistrate or an opposition agent that you need to answer. Like it just kind of starts adding up, and the deck does, I find, suffer from being so reliant on Rocco in that respect.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, it's when I was going through and making these I think I just got to Minx first and was like, I think Minsk is a B tier commander. And like it was a really good B tier commander for what it's worth. It's a excellent commander deck. And then I got to Rocco, and I kind of had that question we've kind of had before, where it's like, okay, if I have this here, what about here? And this was one of those situations. We haven't run into a lot of those this year, but this was one of them for me. Is I had to ask myself if I had to choose between both of them, because they're doing similar things, which one I would rather play. And I was like, I'd just much rather play Minsk. And like, so they operate like, I think they're about the same, if that makes sense to me.
Shockingly
I kind of
weak
put
to
them
similar
on
things too.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because Naya is shockingly weak to those. The
one thing I will say that I do think Minsk has over Rocco is the fact that the search abilities that Minsk does, because they're off of Rectors and Vivians, is much less like completely turned off by an op agent, because those are May searches. And I think that plays a big role into why I prefer those. Because if you uptick on Vivian, for example, your opponent has to opposition agent before you even begin to resolve that ability. They have to respond to the uptick. So if they don't, you go get your card, man. And at that point, you've won the game. And to me, I like that it is you may sacrifice, then you do X. So I can still uptick and I'm not getting completely screwed over. And that is why I kind of lean a little bit more towards Minsk. Is it's way more committed to the Rector strategy, which I much prefer. And, Rocco is a little bit more closer to the food chain strategy, which I don't prefer. So that's kind of where I land on them. I think they're very similar in power level, all to the same stuff. But yeah, that's where I'm at. Let's look at the next one. It is wow. We all had varying takes of this. Rograkh, Tymna, Ryan, or let's just start here. Pongo with an A. I have a B. And Ryan has a C. So we have covered the spectrum. So
what you're saying is we all agree that it's not an S.
We all agree it's not an S tier commander. That we've all kind of fallen there. So let's start here. Pongo, why do you have this as an A tier?
Again, I guess it's important that, somebody does the civic duty of not putting this so low that the next time you see it in your pod, you say, oh, whatever, I don't need to worry about it. This is still, almost or just as fast as Roger Silas. If it's slower, it is not by a whole turn. It is slower by, maybe a fraction of a turn. And, arguably, in some cases it might be faster depending on how the Silas deck is tuned. So I think you need to respect this deck at the table. And as such, I would be remiss to put it too low and give people the wrong idea.
I do not have that problem.
It's really funny. I want to go to Ryan's opinion on it, because my opinion on it is so simple that it's not even worth getting into the middle ground, because it's not even middle ground. It's just simple. Ryan, what's your take on Rog Tymna?
I have opinions about Roger, and that's really a lot of the basis of this. Everyone loves Roger. There's no doubt that Roger has a lot of power of being a 0-drop creature in the command zone and all the advantages you can get out of that. However, Roger also makes you lean into Roger a lot more. And that's where the frailty of Roger Silas comes from, is because if you play certain things that give you all these great boosts for having this 0-drop. Oh, my Infernal Plunge gives me 3 mana, and my Culling the Week gives me 4 mana, and I have a turn 0 whatever. Well, this is Roger with that kind of lean in, with the idea that it's in Mardu. And so Mardu can be a strong color. I actually ranked Tymna Jessica higher, but it's the idea of the inherent frailty of already kind of a frail color combination and having to lean harder into Roger that puts it into a world where I've seen it having to constantly. Let me put it this way. I don't think I've ever seen a player playing Roger Tymna ever keep a hand of 7.
No.
They always have to mull so unbelievably low just to even be able to get something that does something. And it has the frailty to try and trade for that speed, but it finds itself at odds with itself all the time because of it. Some are running World Gorger, some are running Razaketh. So I
don't know why in the world you would play World Gorger in Rog Tymna. There's no outlet for it. I have
some
no
people
idea.
do.
Yeah, I've never seen
it's in the Mardu colors.
Yeah,
but certainly Razaketh in almost every version of the deck.
Yeah. And so it's I've got the tutor for Razaketh right off the bat with my 0-drop. That's so great. And it's all of these synergies that you lean into Roger for creates this frailty if something happens to Roger, or if Roger gets interrupted too many times. You're sitting with these otherwise dead cards that are normally very strong in a synergistic way. And that's where we saw the inherent frailty with Roger Silas, but it had things like blue to back it up.
Yeah.
Because an immediately on Fierce Guardianship is so great, So anyway, I've seen too much floundering from it in trying to go fast than I've actually seen it really just go fast and get there. Yeah, I'd rather have Jessica in the command zone to be able to get further into the late game, have the outlet in the command zone, have the clearing the blockers for Tymna attacks to get my card advantage. And when I say outlet, I mean a combo outlet, sync advantages with Jessica. So I think Jessica is just so much more powerful in this Mardu combination with Tymna than I find Roger.
Yeah, I mean, that's not too far off from what I think. I think mine is just I've seen it just explode enough times that I'm it's enough that you got to respect it. Is kind of how I feel about it. I really ultimately what it was is I put Jessica Tymna as an A, and I think Jessica Tymna, and I've always thought Jessica Tymna was the better partner pairing of Mardu, and I think that Rog Tymna is substantially worse than Jessica Tymna, and I think it's still fine, but I would much rather be playing Jessica Tymna because of, one, you have the mana outlet in the command zone, which is huge, but also 2, you also have a ability to mix up your game, kind of what we were saying about like Tevesh earlier, what you were talking about, where you're able to kind of choose which lane you go in. Jessica has that versatility of also just being a board manager, which I really like. But that's I could talk about why Jessica's great for a long time. Next up on our list is the infamous. We've talked about it a lot today. We've referenced it a lot today. Tymna Kraum, the Sands Green Boogeyman. You two have it as an S. I have it as an A. I ultimately think my opinion on it is I think what people try to do is they try to play Rog Silas and Tymna Kraum a lot of the time. And Tymna Kraum can't really support that, in my opinion. I think Tymna Kraum is best suited, very similarly to Armix Kraum, best suited as a mid-range deck. And when I see it have its most success is when it's playing a much more mid-rangey game. And I think the colors in the commanders trick people into playing it incorrectly a lot. And that is why I kind of have it lower. I think once people figure out, I really loved that Zane won, I think it was Chaos with Tymna Kraum, won it with Tymna Kraum, and his list was exactly what I would be playing in Tymna Kraum. I mean, I would probably be playing it a little bit more mid-rangier, but that's also just how I play. But for me, Tymna Kraum really just comes down to, I think that it's misplayed a lot and misbuilt. And because of that, I think it should be an S tier commander, but I don't think it's quite there yet because people are still trying to make it a Grixis pile when it's actually a 4-color mid-range pile is kind of how I feel about it. But what are your guys' thoughts? What do you think about Ryan? What do you think about Tymna Kraum? Why am I wrong?
Quite frankly, there's really not a whole lot to be said that hasn't been said about Tymna Kraum at this point. It's just two advantages in the command zone, some of the best colors in the entire format, and the best cards. I mean, and it's got the support in white that allows you to do things like lock out opponents during your winning turn, which is kind of the only crux. It recovers well, it sets up well, it has card advantage. Like I said, there's just nothing to say that hasn't already been said at this point, quite frankly.
Yeah. I mean, I disagree with Callahan's your position that people are building it like Roger specifically. My experience has been that people definitely play it much more of like a medium speed turbo deck, if you want to look at it that way. People. I'm an old man, so I remember when people were playing Opus Thief, right? And I remember when people were trying to play like the most mid-rangey versions of Tymna Kraum, even like jamming humility and stuff like that.
That was wild.
And like I don't think that those are better than what we currently have. So I disagree with the notion that we should be going more mid-rangey from where we're at, because I've seen that pushed to its logical extreme and it makes the deck worse. So I think that
I'm just asking for balance.
Well,
just bring it back to the middle, baby.
It needs to exist in this sort of space where it is not trying to go as fast as Roger, and it doesn't. And I have not played against that version of the deck in months now. But people are certainly just playing slightly more interactive versions of the deck. Leveraging the fact that they've got powerful draw engines that can allow them to pivot in that game plan.
Yeah. Looking over to the other 4-color Tymna pairing that everybody loves to talk about, it's the tried and true Tymna Thrasios. The old Sans Red was the boogeyman for a while because of Flash Hulk. Pongo and I have it as an S. Maybe that's just because we're mid-range players at heart. Ryan, you have it at an A. Is that just a proclivity towards a faster meta game, or what's your thoughts on it?
I had a number of discussions with the PWP team over the years about Tymna Thrasios and why we don't see it anymore. Part of it is the new toys problem that I had talked about previously, but also over the past, I guess, what is it, 3-4 years now, all of the banger cards that we see in this format are red. Just Underworld Breach, and I don't even have to go into all of it, like Docksides and stuff. All of the cards that have just been catapulting all of these decks into more and more power territory have usually always been red. And like, to be clear, A is not a bad ranking. We're not talking like this is a D tier deck on any level. It's just that I'm going to hold up 4 mana and then maybe activate Thrasios at the end step. Just seems so slow in comparison to Kraum nowadays and things like that. And so that's why it's kind of really, it just hasn't been getting the toys that all the other decks have been getting, all of just the banger cards that are completely shaking up the meta a lot of times. And it's just kind of sitting there almost in stasis, waiting to get that next big thing to get it back into S territory.
Yeah.
A is still great, but there's just stuff that have been printed in the last 4 years that have just taken all of these other decks and rose the tide with all of them. And Tymna Thrasios has unfortunately just stayed still high, just not as high as some of these other ones have gotten.
I mean, mine comes down to my ranking of it as S, and this is, Najeela on its own, I have as an S tier, would have it there anyway, but this is also an added layer to this. My win rate when I'm playing Thrasios, Tymna, and Najeela is significantly higher than it is on literally any other deck I've ever played. And so I think part of my ranking is because of how I play. I just, Sick Robot's the same way, right? Like, Sick is going to pilot Thrasios Tymna better than anybody else. And I grew up playing in I came up in cEDH during the middle of Flash Hulk Hell. So I just have so much experience playing with Thrasios Tymna that my win rate on those commanders is so much higher than I've ever had with any other commander pairing. Is just kind of where it comes for me. Now, I think they're ultimately extraordinarily boring. But that's a whole different thing.
I think Thrasios and Tymna, it's interesting because like a lot of the more recent Thrasios and Tymna decks that we've seen, I think their biggest strength is just how strong of a counter they can be for some of these faster decks in the format. And how little deck building cost there is for them to be built to do that sort of thing. Playing the things like Force of Vigor hurts so much less in that deck compared to, like, let's say something like Najeela, for instance, where it's not an offensive tool, right? It's not winning you the game. You're never really planning on using that to destroy stacks pieces for the most part that are preventing you from winning, because you're playing Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation type lines that you can assemble in many cases through a rule of law. So you don't care to remove that rule of law, right? If you're just going to resolve, for example, a Divining Witch or a Sacred Guide, and then resolve a Thassa's Oracle on a subsequent turn and activate. You're using these tools and the Collector Roofs and the Force of Negations and all of the free counter magic just to be disruptive. And then you're playing, in my opinion, the best cards that you can be playing alongside Tymna, which is Mana Dorks. Having your mana acceleration also couple as card advantage is so powerful. And in addition to that, you can do the same thing with all of your hate bears. You're basically just playing a synergistic pile inherently because of all of your creatures, and you're sort of playing a creature-based strategy anyway. And even your hate pieces that you're playing and your interaction are so easy to support and so easy to offset the card disadvantage aspects of, because you're 2 card advantage-based commanders, that I just haven't found that Thrasios and Tymna, despite not necessarily getting so many new toys, I haven't felt that they've feel like they've fallen off as a result because they've adapted to the metagame with the existing card pool.
I'll say this, and this is where I'll leave it. Every game I've played on Thrasios Tymna where I have resolved a Seedborn Muse, I have won that game.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
that's where I'll leave it.
That's the thing. They're really, it's a great deck to mulligan towards relevant interaction with, and then to be able to recoup the cost of having to mulligan aggressively, and then just have kind of that sense of inevitability through powerful cards like Seedborn Muse.
Yeah. Last two cards, we're finally into the 5-color commanders here. First one up here is Codie, Vociferous Codex. This is the one that took down Tier 1 Con. What was it, earlier this year or last year?
Last year.
And that is, so we've got an S from Pongo, an A from me, and a B from Ryan. Ryan, ranking this all the way down at just good. Why are you so low on it?
Codie is an incredible pain to pilot. You can't just pick it up and just start playing with it. There's a really important restrictions on it that the deck still has, like you can't cast permanents, so don't cast that LED. Things like that. You have to sequence things properly, and if you pilot it right, you will play the least amount of Magic that you've ever played because you'll either win immediately, right? So turn 1, turn 2, game's over, let's go. It's like Inalla. Or you sit there doing nothing because it was all in on Codie, and you can't cast permanents anymore, so you can't progress your board state, and you're just sitting there playing no Magic. And it's a 3-player pod, and so because of these fidgety kind of aspects to Codie, is why I ranked it at a B.
I think that's fair.
What do you think, Pongo?
Yeah. So
is this another respect S ranking?
Exactly. Let me finish and get my thoughts out here. I do think after Tier 1 Con, people did 100% start respecting Codie, and it did feel like that deck became much harder to justify playing because, yes, you were kind of the arch enemy from the very start. So let me just keep this short and sweet. Now's not the time to get complacent.
Yeah.
Don't rest on your Codie laurels, people.
Just keep
constant vigilance.
That deck down.
Remain vigilant. There's always threat, and I kind of come down in the middle of there where it's like I agree with a lot of what Ryan's saying. I think it's a little bit fragile. I think it's a little bit, I think in the hands of somebody who knows how to play it, it's not even remotely fragile. But I don't think most people know how to play it. And that's ultimately the issue. The people who know how to play it are going to beat you with it every single time. And that's just kind of the reality of it. But those people, I know like a handful of them. Here to our final one is Kenrith the Returned King. And we have an S from Ryan, an S from Pongo, A from me. Ryan, why do you have this up there at an S? Like for Kenrith?
The cEDH decklist database can kind of tell you everything that you need to know about Kenrith. You can build it 1,000 different ways, and it's still powerful. Building all of these flexible, abilities onto this commander just makes it such raw power that you can go stacks, you can go turbo, you can go 5 other different directions, and still be able to utilize some of its power to cater to your strategy even more.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm in ad naus, and someone knows that I'm in ad naus. I'll just gain 5 life at the end of your turn. And be able to flip 4 more cards or something. Like just the raw power and the raw flexibility of being able to build whatever you want with Kenrith and it still be a force of the table really puts it into an S tier for me.
Yeah. Pongo, you echo similar thoughts?
5-color baby. Let's go. Yeah.
So it's King K rule.
King K rule.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you say there. I think the big difference is for me is I was very light with what I put into S tier. If you notice, I only put ranked 3 things as S tier. And I think ultimately for me, where it came down to is when I looked at the 5-color decks and I was like, which one of these do I like the most? It was Najeela, and it wasn't even close. And I think Kenrith is really good, but I think that its mana cost holds it back a pretty decent amount. You lose access to the Force of or the Fierce Guardianships, the Deadly Relics, the, deflecting swats, because your commander is so expensive. And I think that is, to me, something that I don't love as much, but it's still amazing. Like, the card is still really good. I just don't think... I was very picky with what I put into S tier this year. Well, that about wraps things up for this week's episode and this year's tier list video. Thank you so much to Ryan from Playing with Power for sitting down with us and going through this again. Getting to do this every year with Ryan is always a blast. We always have a good time. If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to rate the show on whatever podcast platform you are on. Or if you are watching or listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below to tell us what your favorite part of the show was. I also want to thank our top tier patrons, Justin, Adam Hamden, David Snavely, Dionyches, Jason Bialik, Josh Stein, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. If you would like to support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors, or you can check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.